Welcome back to another edition of the Hart2Heart Podcast, and my guest today is Dr. Karen Mitchell. She's an expert in identifying narcissists and just people who are basically trying to control or manipulate others. So, Dr. Mitchell, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, just before we kind of get started and I start asking you some questions, can you give the audience a little bit of a brief background about yourself?
Okay, so my undergrad was in science, then I did a degree in business, then a master's in commerce. I worked for, all my life I've worked in human behaviour, so in public health, but really 30 years in corporates on culture and values and mergers, acquisitions, a lot of work with diversity, so setting up cultures to be more amenable to diverse types of behaviours and approaches. And then I started to get interested in some of the behaviours that I saw in corporates that were antisocial. As you said, manipulation, control, deceit, pretty much trying to destroy other people, steal other people's work. And they were very, for cultures, very destructive. Not just for individuals, but for whole organisations. So, and at the same time, I was seeing some of my friends going through divorces, and I started to become a sort of an activist in the family court, which also has some of these people in it who are judges and psychologists and meant to be helping who have these same behaviours. So sorry about my dog. So, I decided to do a PhD on this area because I saw that it was having so much impact on so many people. And I was shocked at what I found when I started to look at the research that's been done in this area. There are literally hundreds of thousands of pieces of research on psychopaths, on narcissists, Machiavellians, dark triad, coercive control and domestic violence, cults, child sex abuse and religion. They're all studying the same behaviours, but none of them overlap. And there are huge anomalies in the research, huge arguments between academics as to what sort of, the cumulative attributes of these people. To the point where the academics even litigate against each other if someone speaks out against their theory.
So are you saying that there's some ambiguity or some disagreeing between what a narcissist is or what a psychopath is in the academic community?
It's more, yes. So within the psychopathic community, there's arguments. Within the narcissistic community, they just keep coming out with more models and more ideas, and there's a malignant one and a vulnerable one and a covert one. And I mean, this does not help us as a human race because, understanding human predators is, of course, key to survival. So it's not just the anomalies, the arguments in the fields, it's also that they don't even look at each other's work. So these are people studying the same sorts of human beings, but the coercive control and domestic violence, they stick to their area. Psychopaths stick to their area. Dark triad.
And so in what you kind of found, or from my understanding, not to interrupt you there, is that you more or less saw a lot of things going on in professional life and also in, personal life with friends. You saw people being manipulated and controlled. And then you went and did this PhD. And then with the PhD, it seems like you're incredibly surprised at all the research that's done on it, and also incredibly surprised at why there's not more people talking about it and more people sharing this information so they can protect predators or protect themselves and others from predators overall. That seems to be what you're trying to do here. Is that essentially correct?
Yes. So, yeah, because, I know people who've been really harmed by them. And so I wanted to get, my PhD was about understanding what are the key attributes of these people, without all the arguments and, without all the, people disagreeing, and trying to bring those fields of study together.
And so when you do look at the attributes that, you know, consist someone who is a narcissist or a psychopath, is it generally the dark triad that you kind of try to let people know of right away, or what are the things that people should be looking out for overall?
Yeah, so what I found in my research, so I went to all these fields and I decided I had to do new and innovative research to really understand what was going on. So I went to groups of people that had never been canvassed for data. And one of those groups was practitioners who work with, I call them dark personalities or predators, outside of the justice system. Would you believe no one's ever researched that group of people? So I went to practitioners who have an average of 22 years continuous experience with whatever you want to call them, narcissists, psychopaths, you know, dark personality, I call them, or predators, as I've said. And they're working in areas outside the justice system. So in cults, child sex abuse and religion, corporate toxicity, leadership toxicity in politics, surgeons where they've conducted what they call black swan events. So my research is new, and I used different innovative ways of collecting data. And what my data shows is that none of the existing models are correct. And that narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, Dr, they're all just subsets of one high-level predator that has a particular set of attributes.
You know, and again, this is a really difficult question to answer, but like, how would someone, you know, identify these traits, you know, and again, it's going to be in different workplaces. And I want to get back to that question, but there's one in question I want to ask you actually before that. So we know that traits are passed on, right, from gene to gene, through people, you know, have kids, you know, offspring, reproduction, genes are passed on. So why is it that, you know, the psychopath trait is passed on? Like, is there something beneficial about it? Like, why is it that psychopaths sometimes almost thrive in society, and then because they're thriving, they have kids and they pass on those genes? But like, what is it about a psychopath that, you know, just keeps getting passed on and passed on?
Well, we actually don't know how these people are created. So again, I call them dark personality or predators. So predators, and that encapsulates narcissism, psychopaths, Machiavelli. So just predators. And predators have different brains to us, right? So a gentleman called Raine, R-A-I-N-E, from the University of Mexico, many years ago started doing MRIs of the brains of predators in prison who had met the criteria for psychopathy using the PCLR test, which was developed by Robert Hare. And he found that the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala of their brains were considerably different. So they didn't really emote. They didn't feel fear. They don't really feel joy, but they get satisfaction from particular things. So they are very different to us. They get satisfaction from control and from confusing, intimidating, demeaning, disadvantaging, and destroying other people. So Raine then went and bought his own MRI and went and did thousands of MRIs on brains of people in prisons, but also a lot of people started to follow him and do the same sort of research. And we're getting more and more information as to these brain differences. Now, we're extrapolating on the general population. So we need to, in some way, study the brains of people who are like this, who are lawyers and doctors and judges and, you know, teachers and academics. So there's potentially more people who are like this outside of prison than inside of prison. And the key finding of my research is that those outside of prison are equally committed to destroying their targets as those in jail for murder. They just do it in a more covert manner through emotional
let me see if I can break that down. So the people who are in jail versus, say, the people who are, say, outside in the workforce, they both have this issue with their brain where, their amygdala and the prefrontal cortex is basically not functioning the same as someone who's not a psychopath or not a narcissist. And when you look at them on their MRI, the people who are outside the prison have just as much of a disconnectivity in their amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Say you take someone at work who's trying to, get someone fired or make them feel humiliated or shame them or whatever it is. They're essentially having the same level of like nastiness or, evilness and that disconnectivity in their amygdala and the prefrontal cortex as murderers who are in jail. Is that correct?
That is our extrapolation from the incarcerated populations that we've studied. We haven't been able to study, although we're starting to look at that now, we haven't been able to study the brains of people outside of the prison system because they're really hard to actually get to. And that's why it just astounds me that we just don't have a clear picture until I think my work, I think it does show a clear picture, but we've never had a clear picture of what they're like outside of prison because no one's really got accurate information on them. And so what people like Bob Hare are doing is taking a model that he's developed from incarcerated populations and trying to apply it to corporates. And he argues that they're impulsive. Well, clearly, if you're a CEO or a director on a listed company, you're not going to be impulsive, right? So And he doesn't include sadism in his model of psychopaths either. And sadism came out incredibly strongly in my data and some other data. Sadism in the broader sense of the word, meaning they like to disadvantage, demean, intimidate, confuse, as I said before. But so we haven't actually been able to test the brains of them outside of prison. But when you think about it, and this came out really clearly in my data, prison is just an arbitrary line. So they're all the same. Some of them are just more intelligent, have better impulse control capability, are from higher socioeconomic status communities and have more money. And they can pay people to do stuff for them. Whereas, ones who end up in jail, can't pay someone, so they, can't bribe someone in the courts, etc. So they end up in prison. So I'm often asked, is it a continuum? My data indicates it's not a continuum. They all have these attributes, but the way they manifest these attributes in different contexts, like as a teacher or as a judge, etc., depends on factors like intelligence, whether they're confined in their ability to be able to do this, the impulse control capability, how many supporters they have. People who are lower socioeconomic often aren't as able to get as many people supporting them. But politicians, for example, can get more support to get away with what they're doing. I don't know if does that make sense to you?
That absolutely makes sense. I mean, if you have the means, if you have the money, you can pay people, you can get people to do things for you. If you don't have money, then, basically it's all on you to kind of do whatever task that you want to have. And you can't really, distance yourself as much, like we'll get into it a little bit, but I remember, one of your tweets was talking about, a lot of people who are psychopaths and narcissists, they tend to donate to charities or become part of charities. And, they have ways of, making themselves look good or making themselves, appear well to others because of their position, right? And the only way you can donate to a charity is if you have the money to donate to one, which many people don't. So I understand that there's various different ways that they can certainly disguise themselves. And one thing that I did want to ask you about specifically. I just wanted to read that one tweet that you had that kind of went viral because, it really ties in a lot to my work too as a physician, because obviously, I have lots of patients who go to different mental health care practitioners for, various different reasons. And, many of them may relate to this. So, this is what you said, and just give me one moment here to read it. So many psychologists and psychiatrists are narcissists, psychopaths / predators. They love the control and power it gives them over people, the way they can engage in manipulation, the ability to apply sadistic behaviors, all without being suspected, and with the added delight of being able to use their professional role against the client if ever challenged or exposed. Be cautious who you give your trust to. And I just think that's an incredibly good message out there, because if you're saying to someone, just go to a psychologist, they're professional, they'll never do anything, like that is such a naive statement. It's such a naive thing to say to someone. And so, I do think that people need to be aware that there are people out there, there are people in, really high positions and in positions where they're, treating people for mental health disorders, where they do have psychopathic traits. And, it's something that doesn't get discussed, and I imagine that's something why, or that's the reason why that you brought it up, is because no one's really talking about this, and it's something that needs to be talked about that you've identified.
Yes, and it was interesting that I got attacked, as you would have seen, by psychopaths and psychiatrists, and not in a professional, challenging way, but really cutting and bullying. And so, yes, as you're saying, I got a huge response from people saying, clearly you're over the target, because the way that they're bullying you and attacking you is actually quite telling. And I'm actually still getting warnings around that issue. And that was about 3 weeks ago. So, yeah. And the reason I said it, I don't have quantitative data. So, of course, quantitative data is like, thousands of people. And qualitative data is more where you get more depth into the data, right? Rather than quantitative. Quantitative just reflects again and again and again that the same thing is true, whereas qualitative, you want to explore the topic more. And I had to do qualitative because there were so many issues of contention that if I just did quantitative, I'm just duplicating more and more of the same. And if you're measuring the same wrong thing again and again, it's not useful. So I had to delve deep. And so what dark personalities or predators will do is argue against your data, argue against you as a person. They don't engage with the actual data. That's one of their blocking tactics, right? And so again, what my data shows is that there's incredibly high number that are high functioning in law, in medicine, psychology, etc. I don't have numbers around it. But I also, in my work, know of at least 20 that are predators, psychologists / psychiatrists. And I know this because I've collected an enormous amount of data on each of them. Which shows and reflects the attributes that came out of my study and also the tactics. So my research actually was amazing because it also exposed all the tactics they use. Like they blame the poor target or victim for what's going on and attribute their attributes to the victim. They will block and delay, and they will weaponize the justice system, and they track people. So they will bribe or influence or intimidate people to give them information on their targets as to where they're going to be when, as to what, their phone records, and we think, oh yeah, this is a bit like a spy movie or, but I think it's up to around 10% of the population and possibly 15% in roles that are leadership roles that have control, like medicine, board directors, CEO executives, leaders in religion. I mean, you've got a high number. And yeah.
I have a question about that, actually. So, you know, I kind of wrote it down, so I'm just gonna read it out to you, okay? Could there be physicians out there who were rejected by their peers in the opposite sex, when they were younger, who are still carrying that hurt into adulthood, and now they're hurting children? And would prescribing puberty blockers be an example?
I'm not going to go into that whole puberty blockers debate because it is, it's very politically.
I completely understand. You can get in a lot of trouble for saying, anything these days. But I guess, and I'm certainly not saying that that's happening, but I think it's like, just something. It's just like a question. It's again, I'm not like accusing anyone of anything, but based upon human behavior and what we know, what people are, capable of, I just think that there should be maybe some level of, investigation and, maybe some of the people who are, really pushing this, and again, I could be completely wrong, and that's fine. But I just think that we should have a little bit more of a open dialogue. But even if you take the question back,
I can say something on that subject. So my data relates to adults, right? So again, that's another reason I'm not really, willing to talk. So what I will say is, let's talk about the sexual world of the predator, right?
Sure.
Because a lot of sexual data on sexuality and relationships came out of my research. And in terms of the whole, transsexual area and everything, to just preface this, predators have absolutely no boundaries around sexuality. They will do anything. They will say anything. They use sexuality to demean, to humiliate, to control, to leverage. Sexuality is a tool. At the same time, it is something they will explore in any way they can. So their own children, the family pet, but they all have proclivities like we all do. So we all have our own sexual sort of, proclivity. A lot of them will go for children. They will go for adults and children and anything. They are fascinated by all things sexual. They know if they're high functioning, they have to hide it. So they will use the religion. They will use a marriage. They will use charities as things to hide behind, so as they can continue a life of child porn addiction or pedophilia or transsexual. The whole transsexual thing is part of that. So they are fascinated by transsexuals at all forms of transition. So, for example, one of them was talking about, liking to see a breast and a penis at the same time. Anything that's kind of, not totally the norm. And so a high number of them actually are drawn to transsexual or will become transsexual because, they feel like that's what they like to do because it's interesting. So you do get a high number that have all those attributes of deceptive, bullying, lying, wanting control, wanting a platform. And I can say definitely there are people who are, genuinely born into a body that does not reflect who they are. And I feel sad for these people, not sorry for them, but sad for them because these predators have made it really difficult for them by engaging in these behaviours that they love to engage in, which is bullying. They're taking on a trans identity for their own selfish reasons, and all predators are only about themselves. So anything they might do that looks good, like donating to charity or whatever, it is all about their own goals. which are about maintaining lack of exposure, so maintaining their secret life because they hate their freedom to be taken away in any way. So it's about hiding, it's about achieving their goals, it's about getting away with all the stuff they want to get away with, often of which is, morally dubious or against the law or breaks regulations or rules or agreements. They all have double lives. So I've interviewed a lot of people on these issues separately to my PhD. So I've got a huge background in this. And most marriages where you talk to women and men, but there's more men that are predatory. We don't have enough data on this, but so far the data shows that. Most partners acknowledge that they, have been kind of duped. This person has had this whole other life going on the whole time.
And so when you say that, do you mean like the partner was like gay, but they, married someone to kind of look normal, or not normal, but to, to appear heterosexual so that they didn't have to face, any backlash for potentially being homosexual? Or
No. These dark personalities, from my research, are drawn to either sex, and I'm using the word sex in the biological term, so the male sex or the female sex. So they're drawn to both. And again, this data needs to be tested, but I have got a lot of information that shows that. So what they might do is be in a normal heterosexual marriage, but then at night they're on these dating, this is, a few people that I've interviewed, at night they're on dating sites with men, right? So it might be a male that marries a female in a normal heterosexual relationship, but again, using that heterosexual relationship and having children. Often children are part of the look, the cover. But they might even, there's one case where he was taking naked photos of his wife and then putting them online to attract men and then having sex with men. And this might sound a bit of a one-off, right? This might be this guy was actually taken to court for this behaviour. And guess what? He was a head of integrity in a law enforcement area. I won't say what country, but there's a lot in law enforcement, and there's a lot because they love the control, they love the fact that they can just say, well, I'm the police person or the law enforcement person, so, I have power over you. But that's why you see sadistic behaviour sometimes in law enforcement, because they can't help themselves but do that. Now, I want to say there are millions of fantastic law enforcement people out there, but it is a profession that they are, you can see there's a pattern. The professions that they go to are ones that cover their nefariousness, that give them control over people, that allow them to exercise some of that sadistic stuff, and that, allow them to lead a double life. So, yeah.
Okay. So say though, if you're, kind of changing topic, we're staying on a little bit. So I know there's people out there who, especially probably younger girls, but it could be older girls. It also could be men who, are targets for manipulation from men for, sex or whatever it is that they're looking for. Obviously, most of the time it's sex. So, what are the things that women have to look out for in men to make sure that they're, genuinely interested in them and that they're not just a psychopath who's kind of just charming them?
Okay, red flags. There's a lot, but some of them are very subtle, right?
Okay.
So one of the red flags is shallow affect, where they don't emote a lot, right? So they're kind of dull in the way that they express themselves. They don't laugh so much. Because remember how we talked about the brain differences? And
yes.
So they don't really have a lot of emotion. So they have to create personas. They have to create emotion. They have to act emotions, right? So as they look kind of normal. And they know from quite young, psychopaths / narcissists / these predators, they know from quite young that they're different. They know that they don't feel the same way when someone's being bullied as anyone else, right? At school, sort of thing. So they study people to learn, firstly, how to behave, and secondly, what the vulnerabilities are. So if you see someone watching your hands, it means that they're potentially, I'm not saying 100%, potentially they're looking at your hands to understand your vulnerabilities. So predators, from the very second they meet you, are like predators in the wild. They're looking for, are you vulnerable? What are your weaknesses? From the outset, can I manipulate you if I go forward with you in a relationship? Can I control you? So they will be looking at your hands to see where because they don't really fully get emotions. Now, sometimes I'm told that people who are neurodivergent in other ways might also have shallow affect, but I don't want to go into that area. People who are, neurodivergent, like autists or ADHD, are clearly well-motivated, great people, right? So I'm only talking about predators. And so you can look for shallow affect, you can look for looking at your hands. Because they don't feel fear, they stare. So another thing is, and they will watch you as you move around the room to make you feel special. They will stare at you, often without even blinking, for quite a long period of time. There's many things.
Just to comment on that. So, I mean, obviously, if a guy sees a pretty girl, he's gonna, not all the time, but like he may glance over at her, which sometimes can be harmless. But if they're sort of like staring, like I guess staring for longer, then that is sort of a little bit of a, okay.
That's definitely part of it. And then when you're sitting talking to them, say if you're on a date, they will stare in your eyes. It's a tactic they use to engage. So you may have heard the term love bombing. So it's part of the whole, they bomb you with very early on with all these behaviours, so there's two reasons for the staring. One is they just don't feel fear. So they can just look at you without that nervousness that one might usually feel, for example, on a first date. But also it's to make you feel special. So if someone makes you feel in the first week that they know, totally understand you, and they're amazing, and you've never met anyone like this before, be really, be suspicious, because they want to get you in quickly. And so they do a lot of these, they'll ask you often a lot of questions, and they'll really sound like too good to be true. Now, look, I guess in 5% of cases they might be, genuinely. But, and great, good on you if you find that. But a lot of them are this love bombing stuff where they find out a lot about you and can say, well, I'll help you with that. I can do that for you. And you think, oh my goodness, someone gets me within a week or within 2 weeks. If they ask you to move in, or if they, within a short period of time, total red flag.
Okay. What would be the window of period? Would it be, say, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year? Like, what's the sort of red flag area?
Sometimes it's even a week or a few weeks, and they target people who are isolated. So never say to someone you've just met, oh, I don't talk to my family anymore, or I'm living apart from my family. They're on the West Coast, I'm on the, they're always like rubbing their hands together when they know someone's isolated, right? They're like, oh, that's easier to control them and manipulate them. And so if you're not isolated, they will start to isolate you once you're in a relationship. And they use tactics like cult leaders. So I would say, even though there's no, data on this as such. I've studied a lot of cults as part of my PhD. And I would say every cult leader is a predator. And so you have predators in families, you have predators in cults, you have predators in religion. Wherever there's vulnerability, predators in hospitals, surgeons, always get a second opinion. Look for the red flags in surgeons, look for the red flags in psychologists and psychiatrists, look for because, you do get quite a few of them where there are vulnerable people. The family court.
One red flag I wanted to ask you about with regards to relationships just for a sec as well. And this can be, not at the beginning of a relationship. It could be any time, the middle or, deep into a relationship. People will say to their partner, like, you need me. What do you think of that when someone says you need me? Do you think that's a sign of manipulation?
Yes. So they go through the normal stages of an animal predator, like a lion, right? So what they do is they look for a group of vulnerables, right? So for a lion, it might be a group of gazelles because they're vulnerable to, they're not as fast as some of the other, animals that are looked on as prey, right? And then they look for someone weaker in that pack. And this is what human predators do. Then they isolate that prey from the pack. So they'll look for a younger one or a sick one or an older one, and then they isolate them from the pack so they don't have support. And that's what predators do once they're in a relationship. They'll say, for example, to the family members, oh, look, she's going through a bit of a hard time, or he's going through a bit of a hard time. Why don't you just stay away just for 6 months? Let me, it's all done with smoke and mirrors. It's under the, guise of caring about them. But then the person, the target, the husband or wife or partner, thinks, God, my family aren't talking to me, and they get sensitive about it. The whole thing becomes really difficult, becomes messy to the point where, so they then get upset at their family, like, what are you doing? And the family might avoid calls. And it might be friends as well. So they'll say to one of the friends, oh, look, we're going overseas for a month, and they're not. It's all done with a lot of lying. Anyway, so they separate, they isolate the person, and then the next stage is they weaken them, right? So the lion will chase the gazelle a lot till they can get them. And that's what the predators do. They demean, they start making really horrible comments. It's exactly what you said. That's what happens then. So they decrease their sense of confidence. They criticize things that the partner does well. So the partner I call it destruction of the soul, killing of the soul. And there's this incredibly effective technique that they use to keep their prey attached to them. And cult leaders
I think the low confidence thing is really important, because once you have destroyed someone's confidence, then you've kind of destroyed what they can do going forward. I mean, that's going to affect their work. It's going to affect their relationships with other people. Obviously your work and career is massive. That has a big impact on your overall well-being in your life. And if someone's sort of, constantly criticizing you, you may not even notice that you're, still in the same place for years and years, because, you just don't feel like you have, the confidence to kind of, pick yourself up and move forward. And so I think that's a very important point that you just noted.
Well, and yes, that's true. And there's quite a few of those sorts of tactics, right? So this one that is really, the isolationary one is really bad, because you've got no sounding board then to test. Am I that bad? Am I this? But the most insidious tactic that I was saying is used by all the darks in all the different contexts, right? In a corporate, in religion, in cults, in families, is this push in, pull out thing. So they they'll shower their target with, wow, you were amazing, what you just did, da, da, da. And so you want that love. You want that. And, pimps, as they are called, of child prostitutes do the same thing. One of my FBI profilers was saying that they use the same technique as well. So they make you feel incredibly loved, but then they back off and you feel desolate because it's like you had this incredible love. So you do what they want because you want it back. And the love that is not real, the love that they express, but it's so easy to get sucked into because it's not what normal people do when they express love. It's felt in an incredibly deep way by the target. I mean, they've mastered this stuff in such a way that so you don't leave because you want that back. It's like a drug, that sense of love.
And do you find that younger people are sort of more vulnerable targets to this, like this push and pull method, or do you feel like it's the same across all ages?
I think it's the same. Look, I can't say that, and statistically I can't talk to that, but I think it's all ages. Again, my data shows very strongly that they target vulnerables. And they also use intimidation. They use cold anger. So hot anger is dysregulation. You know, you get really angry because you've been cheated or, you know, that's kind of normal hot anger. Cold anger, they just put it on. They act it. So you feel intimidated. And so you're scared to leave. Initially, you don't want to leave, even when they start showing those negative signs, because you want that drug. Sorry, Hermione, stop it. They want that love drug back again. But then as it goes on, they're scared to leave because the intimidation increases. Have you heard of the frog in the saucepan of water?
No.
Metaphor?
No.
So if you put a frog in a saucepan full of cold water.
Oh yes, okay. No, yeah, I've heard of this.
I want you to know.
It's good. It's good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have not done this, but if you warm the water up and it gradually becomes boiling, it's because it's slow. The frog doesn't realise and it boils to death. But it could have jumped out at any point, and that is part of the process that happens. When you're being bullied in a workplace, when by one of these predators, or in religion, or at home, it starts slowly. And so again, there's many reasons why people don't leave, because by the time they've realised what's going on, and you question yourself, you think, oh, did they really say that? That sounded a bit off. And you just say, no, it was an accident. Or we give them a lot of rope to hang themselves, whereas we should be just giving them the first couple of feet of rope. In Australia, it's meters of rope, and then saying, no, sorry, I'm not going to give you more rope to hang myself. That's why the fact that we don't know all the red flags, because I can give you 30 red flags, and they're all going to be in my book. So I'm writing, but the fact that we don't know them means we don't even know what to look for. So we give them heaps of rope. We want to be able to detect, early on a group of red flags. We don't want to have to wait, which is what we're all doing now, until it's too late, until you're trapped, until we're aware of the intimidation. And the issue with these people is they have no sense of guilt or shame or...
Well, that's part of being a psychopath, right? Is that you don't feel any guilt. Right. So I assume actually, because you were talking about the amygdala earlier and the prefrontal cortex. And from my understanding, the way like a panic attack occurs is when your amygdala is just completely firing and, you can't actually access your prefrontal cortex or your smart brain. And so because of that, you're just kind of stuck in this state where your amygdala is just firing. And then, you can't get out of it kind of thing. And so if you have this, basically, if this can't happen to you or is less likely to happen to you because your brain is different, because you're a psychopath, then, I imagine that these people aren't going to feel any guilt. They're not going to have PTSD, right? Like if you're a psychopath and you kill someone, you don't get PTSD from it. If you're a normal person and you kill someone, you do something bad happens to you, you usually get PTSD from it, or you have some type of trauma. But these people just don't experience that at all.
Correct. They don't at all. In fact, they enjoy it. So they've done tests like sweat test and heart rate test with a fear stimulus, and there's no sweat. They don't feel that fear. They did notice a heart rate. This was a study that was done a couple of decades ago. They did this. They did test the heart rate, and there was a slight increase in the heart rate. So they thought, oh, maybe. But then they realised it was in anticipation. They were looking forward to what was going to happen. Like, a fear thing. What's it going to be? So the mistake that we make as normal human beings is to assume that everyone's like us. These people they just look like us, but they are so different, and there are so many. And yes, it could be the GP that you're seeing. Sorry. It could be the doctor that you see. It could be a head of urban planning in a council, because they have control and they can, take bribes and all the rest of it. There's so much of this going on in the world. And I think nowadays we know that there's a lot of it. But when it comes to... Do you think
they're all at the top, and that's why the world is the way that it is?
Not at all. Some of them are stay-at-home parents. Some of them are, they're in all walks of life. We just struggle with cognitive dissonance to think, again, 1 in 10, that's not statistically significant, but that was the indication from my research participants who are experts in the field. And I went to the top academics. I flew around or used Zoom, and I met the person who's published the most in the world on narcissism, W. Keith Campbell, Don Wynham in Dark Triad, Emma Katz, incredible researcher in the area of coercive control and domestic violence. So there were practitioners, top academics, and they're saying probably around 10%, 15% in higher levels. I mean, to your point, there are a lot more in senior roles. So yes. And now we don't have country borders. We're in an international world, so they can have a lot more influence than they used to be able to have. People often say to me, it seems that there are more of them now. It's not that, I don't think. I think that it could be. I mean, we don't know, but it just is that they have a bigger platform now to assert power, right? And not all of them are greedy. All of them are driven by control. But not all of them are avaricious. Like, not all of them necessarily want money. Some are happy enough with control over a body during a rape, for example. But some do accumulate power so they can get more control, more money, more things. A lot are motivated by that. So greed is a huge driver for some of them.
And so if someone is, trying to identify, one of these traits in the workplace, like it's kind of the same, that it would be in someone in a relationship. Like, sure, some of the behaviors would be different, but overall their personality is gonna, come out the same, it seems like.
Correct. So the same attributes, and they use the same tactics. It's, it's fascinating but horrific that they all use the same tactics. It's like they go to Predator School 101. They know to weaponize the justice system. They know to reverse attribute and say that what they're doing, that their victim is actually doing. They know to block. They know to delay. They know to, and they don't just do them like normal people would do. I call it, I say it's like tactics on steroids. Like, if we wanted to use the justice system, we would just file an affidavit and an application. Well, you know what they do? They'll file in 10 courts, right? They do everything far more than we would, and they are relentless. So they have, the high functioning ones have what I refer to as unrelenting attention to personal purpose. So you'd think, well, that guy's on all these boards. Why would he bother targeting this one person and spending all the time on them? You know why? Because they love it.
Because they enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's their juice.
That's
the
so strange. So,
yeah.
We know that these people exist. And I mean, I imagine they don't really come forward, but that is my next question. Like, does someone ever, when they're a teenager or maybe, when they're a little bit older in life, they're just like, holy shit, I think I'm a psychopath. They're going to go get treatment for this. Like, does that ever happen ever?
That never happens ever, because they see themselves as superior, because they do not emote. They see emotion as a weakness. So they look down on the likes of us who, I'm making an assumption you're not one, because you never know you never know what's going on. But, so they look down on the likes of us who have emotions, because, so they see themselves, so they have an incredible sense of ego and entitlement. And because they don't experience, so the only reason they go to sort of therapy is because it's mandated, like in a prison thing. But then they learn how to get early release and they will go sometimes with, with a partner, for example, to get data on them. Everything they do is instrumental. Their relationships are instrumental. Everything is to forward their agenda. They're like a me machine.
Yeah, everything is with a purpose to get to like the higher place that they essentially want to go, or to commit the acts that they want to go, so that they can get the power that they want to feel, or the power that they so desire, essentially.
Correct. And it destroys people. Like, one of the people in my research is, I won't say whether it's a male or a female, but they have usually around 20 to 25,000 staff. They're an international executive. This person was targeted by a CEO, all the demeaning, the cold shoulder, like the CEO, he would not like even talk to this person, or, like all the, the ignoring, the screaming at, all this sort of stuff. This person, who's very senior, said it took them about 7 years to get over that experience of 3 years with that CEO. It really has a huge impact, and a lot of people suicide, and that's a good day for a predator, right? It means I didn't have to murder them myself, so there's no risk to me, but they've now taken themselves out of the world. I was effective. Rub my hand.
That's really, sick to hear, but it's also important for people to hear, because we know, what people do. We know the atrocities that have happened in the past and that are happening, right now in the world. There's wars going on. There's lots of people who are, dying that don't need to be dying. There's so much, destruction. We don't need to get into all that, but certainly, you do need to be aware of the people who have these, types of behaviors. And I know I only have you for a few more minutes, but there was something that you put out. I'm not sure it was fairly recently, or maybe I dug it up from one of your past tweets, but it says, I'm often asked about how borderline personality disorder fits with narcissism, psychopathy, coercive control. My data indicates narcissism, psychopathy, and coercive control are all just subsets of one overarching dark personality type, which has the attributes and uses the same tactics. I call it persistent predatory personality. It is my belief that the behaviors which are meant to constitute BPD or borderline personality disorder are in fact normal human responses to exceptionally grueling and long-term abuse or torture, like those inflicted that are of PPP. So, I think that's really nice to hear if you're someone who has, borderline personality disorder, because again, as, a general practitioner, family doctor, I see people who, get diagnosed with this. And then I also feel like now that they have that diagnosis, they're like, oh, now I'm different from everyone. I can't, excel like everyone because I've just been told that I have this diagnosis.
Yes, I think we have to remember that the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is about mental health disorders, and a lot of people will hear about this. It's published by the American, is it the Psychological Society? But it's an American publication. They have a similar one in Europe, but people would have heard of Cluster B. Cluster B is the personality disorders, but remember, they're all made up, right? They're
all made up by people, and some of those people could have been completely wrong. Like every diagnosis is made up by a person, and people make mistakes.
Correct. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I respect that there are people who do have experience, have contributed, etc. But my view from my research and from doing massive literature researches of all of these areas is that there are three types of people in the world. There's the predators, the prey, and then the kind of, in inverted commas, normal people who've had generally normal upbringing. And the prey end up getting terrorized by the predators, and they end up with these behaviours that are classified as borderline or histrionic, or and look, some of their behaviours can be really hurtful. So I'm not taking away from that, but what I am saying is I think we could work with these people in a different way in terms of acknowledging what they might have been through. And again, this is a starting point for a dialogue. I'm not saying, that I'm right or I'm whatever. I'm just saying this is something to consider, right? And so, yes, my research does indicate that there's just one predatory personality, and we want to be focusing on their attributes and their tactics, not what makes them different, not that some are introverted and some are extroverted, not that some are, because, academics are rewarded for finding new things. We don't want new things in this area. We've got lots of research. We want to refine what we know and understand exactly, and that's what the persistent predatory personality model is that I developed. It's what I believe from all of my 5 years full-time of researching this and having experience for 30 years with it. I do believe that there is one set of attributes and tactics that I think I have managed to kind of identify, and that narcissists, psychopaths, dark triad are all part of this, just one, they're subsets of this one overarching predator type of human being. And then you have the behaviours in others who have been, so a lot of the millions of people have been born to these personalities and had horrendous sadistic upbringings, and of course they're going to have behaviours, that are, the result of, terrorism or war, so we need to get clearer about the predators so we can get clearer about their impact and then help these people who have been brutalized by them.
I agree. I think that, instead of, potentially labeling someone with a personality disorder, you could just say that, you had a bad experience, what you're, the way that you're behaving now, even though it's not appropriate, it's a normal reaction because of what happened to you. But we are going to take some steps here and intervene, whether it's psychological, counseling, whatever it is, to correct that and make sure that you don't have this anymore. And then you'll get, quote unquote, like back to normal sort of thing, and obviously, you have your, new book coming out, which is, I imagine, is going to really help people identify different predators and that kind of thing. I've mentioned this book on this podcast before, but The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. And so, he's basically written a book on manipulation. It's actually banned in most U.S. prisons. You can't even get it there. And so, it's something that I think people should read if they're, especially if you're like incredibly naive. Like for myself, for example, like, I grew up just with like the best friends in the world. And, I grew up in St. John's, Newfoundland, which was an amazing spot. And so, coming from a place like that, I didn't really see, backstabbing. All I saw was just kind of like really good loyalty and good character people, for the most part, and so, if you grow up like that, I think, these kinds of books and these kinds of conversations and podcasts are incredibly important, because, if you don't learn them, people will use them against you, so you have to learn them. And then the other thing, and Jordan Peterson kind of talks about, this quite a bit, is that, it's not a virtue to be manipulated or to be like taken advantage of. Like that's not a virtuous thing. And so, you need to figure this out. You need to understand, what people are doing, what their tactics are, and you need to be able to identify manipulators. And, that's not saying you need to manipulate someone else, but you do need to know all the tactics of manipulation, because if you don't know them, someone else is going to use them against you. So you do need to know all the tactics of manipulation, but again, you're just using them to protect yourself, not to hurt others. So that's the kind of, way I kind of see your work and what you're doing and why I think it's so important.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think it is. Look, I think some of the top academics have actively prevented the information getting out there.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons, because they developed early models that aren't accurate and they're wedded to those models. Or my data shows that some of the top people in the field of research in this area are themselves predatory. So they don't want the information getting out there. So I am really thrilled with the work that I've done, because I managed to get through and get it out. So yeah, I am pretty happy about it. Yeah. Excellent.
Well, when does the book come out? Do you have a title yet for it, or?
Well, hopefully maybe 6 to 8 months. It's still a while. It takes a while, don't you?
Of course. Of course, it takes a while.
Maybe 6 to 8 months. So hopefully I'll see you again when it comes out and we can chat about what's in it, if that's okay.
Of course. It's been, incredibly, great to chat with you today. I certainly learned a lot. I really like the topic of your work. I think that it's a very important topic. I don't know why, more people won't discuss it, because, I do think that knowing and being able to identify these kinds of behaviors is, so important for just advancing in life. Like getting into a bad situation is bad, so learn from other people's mistakes and avoid getting there yourself, and I think that the work that you're doing, the tweets that you have, so please mention your Twitter handle.
Oh yeah, it's at Karen Mitchell, all one word, all smalls, KarenMitchell __. So two underscores after my name.
Okay, awesome. Well, everyone, go follow Dr. Karen Mitchell on Twitter. She's an absolute gem. And thank you, everyone, so much for listening to this podcast. And as always, I'll be back again soon.